Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction there. So I am going to explain that CV because it sounds very made up, doesn't it? Those things are true, but they came about sort of slightly strangely. So I am a doctor of medicine mostly. I started out life studying astrophysics at University College London because when I was a teenager, the applications handbook was alphabetically arranged, and that's as far as I got through the book. I had wanted to be a doctor, but my teachers had said, to be a doctor, you have to be clever and conscientious and dedicated, and that's not you. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. But in my second year of physics, I lived in a house with some medical students, and one night we went out and I spoke to them about their lives and their hopes. And when we came home, I looked at them sort of all dribbling on each other, and I thought, how hard can it possibly be? And off I went to medical school. Now, in my final year at medical school, I realized the thing that had got me into my love of science was my love of exploration, and particularly space exploration. So I started writing letters to NASA, like lots of letters, in the sort of way that only a 25-year-old naive person can do, basically saying, can I have a job? And it was the early days of email. So I had at home, I had a dial-up modem. I now have teenage boys. The youngest one the other day, I was trying to explain to him what a dial-up modem was, and he kind of vomited in his mouth a little bit. But in the end, a letter came through my door, and it was like American legal envelope, little logo in the corner, NASA logo. I unwrapped it like Charlie unwrapping the last chocolate bar looking for a golden ticket. And inside is a letter from NASA that says, please stop writing. But it says we have a program in Houston, Medical Operations Group. You can apply for that. There are 4 places. Apply if you dare. I applied. I got in, and this is me finishing medical school in style in '97. This is a plane that flies along about 3/4 the speed of sound, 25,000 feet, goes nose up, 10,000 feet, nose down, 10,000 feet. You're weightless like that for 23 seconds in every minute and a half. Does that 45 times in an hour and a half over a body of water that used to be called the Gulf of Mexico. And it's great fun, unless you're the poor guy sitting in the corner there who started throwing up the first time they did that, and then you find out why they also call it the Vomit Comet. It's a remarkable period that we lived through. This is Jeanne Calment. She's the oldest woman who ever lived. She's 122 when she dies in 1997. She's old enough that she remembers Van Gogh walking into her bakery in Arles in France. And I show this because this is the source of much of what we have today in terms of advantage and challenge. This is a unique period of our lives. The world has never changed so fast as it does today. For Jeanne Calment, living was like the act of time travel. She lives through the time of Van Gogh, and by the end of the century, she sees the world becoming the digital world that we have today. When she was in her 90s, she had no heirs, and so she made a deal with a French lawyer that he would pay her 300 euros a month until she died, and then he would inherit her estate. He was 46, he died first. So the world changes now, and our childhoods were different, much more different from our children's childhoods than ours were from our parents. And that is why I think the world is more volatile and uncertain. I work with a series of organizations who deal in higher risk, higher reliability performance. When I was at NASA, I realized they had the same conversations in their coffee rooms that we have in our coffee rooms in medicine, which is, we do this thing on the pointy end of operations. The guys at the strategic end don't really always understand what we're doing, and if that gap in understanding continues, things will go wrong. And so I've spent my life working through organizations, learning how to deal with real-time uncertainty, high-risk, high-consequence environments, and then trying to bring those lessons back to medicine. And so this talk is about that. I currently work for this service, this is Air Ambulance Kent, Surrey, Sussex. We cover the whole of the southeast, and we're ready to go. I was flying with them on Sunday, very busy day, 12-hour shift. We launched 4 times, and we do good work, but it is easy to get that stuff wrong. So this is a crew in America, 2021. They're flying out. They have 2 engines, so they're backing themselves up with a redundancy of a second engine. They experience an engine failure, but they shut down the good engine. They shut down the wrong engine. Vehicle goes into the ground. Everybody dies. So it tells you that this is easy to get wrong, and you can make a cognitively trivial error, and that can cause fatal accidents. Now, in a way, all of the organizations that we work in these days are complex organizations. If you're in Well, the fact that you're here and in this room and in this industry means that you, by definition, work for a complex organization in which there is risk and there is a sharp end, there is a blunt end. And the world, I think, is now arguably much more volatile, uncertain, and complex than it ever has been. This phrase VUCA, which some of you may have picked up along your travels, has been around since the end of the 1980s. It was first invented by the war colleges when they were briefing their officer class. And they said after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world was about to become multipolar. We don't know who we're fighting anymore. It was always very simple when it was Soviet Union and United States and all those alignments. But in a multipolar world, the world is more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I think they were wrong because we had a period of stability of about 30 years after that. I think it's very apt to talk about a VUCA world now. And so this talk is really about how you deal with uncertainty and volatility in a modern world, or at least the things I've learned from my real-world experience. This is my favorite photograph of all of the photographs in human spaceflight. This is not the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon. This is the splashdown of the Apollo 13 crew. Now, for those of you who didn't watch the wonderful Tom Hanks movie when it was out, this is a crew who are traveling in 1970 away from Earth. They are 200,000 miles from Earth when they experience an explosion in one of their oxygen tanks. If you are in space and you lose an oxygen tank, you lose the air that you should breathe, you lose the power because the oxygen fuels your fuel cells and thereby your navigational means because you lose your computer as well. And by the way, the oxygen tank is in the same compartment as your propulsion unit, so you use your propulsion as well. And you're 200,000 miles from Earth. So this crew are dead at that point, unrecoverable. And yet somehow, over a period of 4 days, the crews and the teams pull this together and solve problem after problem after problem until you reach this photograph in the Pacific Ocean with the survivors. In the background there is Captain James Lovell, commander of that mission. I've had the great honor when I was making a series for BBC World Service of interviewing him over 3 days in a library outside Chicago. He is very generous with his time. He feels like it's his duty to pass on those lessons. Fred Hayes, who is in the blur in that photo, who is his lunar module pilot, I've also interviewed. But I also interviewed the flight control team. And the mistake not to make is to see only the people who are most visible. So don't just see Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes and Jack Swigert. See the dozens of people who were in flight control that day, the thousands of people who backed them up. Now, the first remarkable thing is that during the Apollo project, so both the first landing on the moon, Apollo 11, and then Apollo 13, the rescue, the average age of the flight controller in the front room making life-critical decisions was 26. And the most important thing to note from this photograph is that in the 1960s and 70s, 26-year-olds looked really different from the way that they do. So I have also interviewed all three of these at length, and they are a great joy to interview. All of these people in their late or mid-20s made a decision in real time without reference or recourse to a senior grade that saves the mission and or the lives of the crew. In the case of John Aaron, he saves 2 missions and 2 crews aged 26. He saves 12 and 13. And when you think about your own organizations and the level of responsibility you are prepared to give the average 26-year-old, it is not this. And yet NASA knew that this was the new era of complexity and real-time uncertainty. And that cannot be managed in a top-down command control, find the oldest, boldest person and get them to make all the decisions. You had to delegate authority and defer expertise to some of the most junior people in the team to force multiply your effort. And if you told these people that they were the last line of defense, and if you told them that they owned their problems, if you empowered them to come and ask you for help if they really needed help, but you told them that they should be expected to deliver, they would deliver. And NASA, when I talk to the flight directors, they say somehow in modern industry, and certainly for us in modern healthcare, we've forgotten that. We infantilize this grade, we put 10 years of artificial obstacles in their way, and we wait till they're in their mid-30s when they've got a very young family and a very big mortgage, and then we pile a lot of professional responsibility on them. We wonder why some of them break. And I said, you can just get them when they're in their 20s, it's fine. This is all about how we build teams and how we lead teams. Now, this is the leadership strand. We love talking about leadership because we feel like leaders, but actually we all work in complex systems, and in a complex environment, it is not just about leadership. And indeed, the traditional idea of the leader is probably not what you think it is. I am now the professor of anesthesia intensive care, and sadly, when I go out with my crews, 2 pilots, 1 paramedic and me, I'm the senior medical grade. I'm usually the oldest person in the crew these days. But when the phone goes, we're supposed to be airborne in 120 seconds, and when we walk out of the hangar, I am not leading that team. My pilots are leading the team because they are in charge of the hardware most likely to kill or maim us in the next 15 to 20 minutes. When we land on the motorway or wherever it is and the door opens and the engine's shut down, I am still not leading that team. I give it to my paramedic because my paramedic has spent his or her life crawling into ditches and over railways, wondering if lines are alive, not getting themselves killed or anyone else killed. And they have the authority and they have the command. It's only when we get up to the patient that I deploy my skill set, which is to make a complex assessment of a complex system in real time, and then to make recommendations about what we should do, how fast, and where we're going next. And I have that brief moment, and then it's over, and then I'm back to the paramedic who gets us out of the scene, back to the pilots who moves us on to the hospital. The paramedics are very rude about us as doctors. They say, "Doc, to us, you're just a piece of equipment. We get off the rack and we chuck you into the scene and then we pull you out at the end before you hurt anybody else." But the point is that performance in this environment is about fluidity of leadership. There may be someone in that team who holds the ball more often and more regularly than everybody else, and they're the person you identify notionally as the leader. But leadership has to move between the people in the teams because no one has all the right skills. I cannot do all of the jobs in this task, and therefore I must delegate authority. To be a good follower, which we never talk about, is to know what the mission is, to know when it's the time to stop leading and to give the leadership to someone else, to understand how you fulfill the needs of the leader of the moment in fulfilling the mission goals and watching that ball go back and forwards. Leadership is like a ball in a modern system. If you are in a team and you think you're the only person making decisions, you're probably not making the best decisions. Crew resource management. So this is a concept that comes out of NASA in its aviation role in the 1980s that talks about how we should communicate on flight decks and commercial airlines. But it stems from the communications between the Apollo flight controllers during Apollo. It's really to facilitate a flow of information. And a good working definition of crew resource management in our environment is to think of it as a process, a set of principles that allows you to gather the best information from all available sources, human and technical, to get the best information to inform the best decisions. And that is a good working and operating principle, because if you're not making the most of your available resources, you will get to a solution, but it won't be optimal. Now, in the top right-hand side of that is a real job that I went to. This is early in my career with HEMS. It's an articulated lorry that's coming down the motorway. The driver has fallen asleep or is distracted, has not seen a line of stationary traffic and has ploughed into the back of it at 70 miles an hour. He destroys that column, and you can't see it on the photograph, but there are 4 cars in that scene that are still remaining at this point. There's 2 underneath the lorry up front, 1 between the 2 lorries, and 1 smashed into that middle barrier there. There are a lot of casualties in this scene. Now, this photograph is us in the orbit above the scene as we're coming in, and if you count all the people who are wearing high-vis jackets, there are about 38 people there, and there are about another dozen more inside the vehicles trying to pull people out. We are the senior resource. We're going to turn up in an aircraft. We're the only resource with a doctor. But the solution to this problem does not lie within me or even my team of 4. The solution to this problem lies within the 38 people who are already on scene, who are now going to become part of my team. And if I do not gather the information appropriately from them, we will not come to the right answer. And I do want to say a word here about equality, diversity, and inclusion, because it's been in the news a lot. We think of this the wrong way. EDI is not something that we should do because it's the 3rd decade of the 21st century and it's just a decent way to behave towards people. That is true, but that is not why we do it. And even I roll my eyes when the training comes around every year and I have to fill it in. The reason for us in the Helicopter Emergency Medical Service that EDI is important is because if I land at that scene and the people who are now suddenly, I'm meeting for the first time, who are part of my team in a real consequence, real decisions environment, if they do not feel equal to me in the moment, if I do not embrace the diversity of their opinion, if they do not feel included in the solution will not be optimal. And so when we talk about this, that is how we should talk about it. It is not a nice to have. It's not things that we do to be nice to people. For us, it's an operational imperative, and we cannot work without it. Now, all of this stems from a new world that moves faster, that is more complex than it ever has been before, and is more uncertain, as we said at the start of this talk. And in many ways, COVID is the archetype complex, uncertain threat. COVID is defined by these characteristics. Complexity theory is a mathematical theory. It's not a business theory. Complexity is not a literary term. It has a definition. And complex systems have these general characteristics. If you've been in an organization and it has faced a challenge, it's usual that it has most of these properties. So the thing that's threatening you can scale in a nonlinear fashion. That is, it starts small and gets big really quick. It has no single point of control. It can adapt and have emergent behaviors that you don't expect, and it adapts to what you try and put into it. Now, I talk about this as a pandemic, right? But you can see that phraseology, and that is a stock market crash, that is a war, that is a terrorist cell. Dealing with this is really difficult, and it is why COVID was so hard. I'm going to tell you quickly about COVID. So this is my day zero of COVID. We're off shift, we're going home, we take a selfie on the roof of the helicopter, we fly home across the city. That picture on the right is us going out west across London, laughing at all the people in their traffic jams. But it is the last time I will see the city alive like that again for about 2 years, because the next day, Italy goes into lockdown. 16 million people have to stay at home. And we in the UK at this point somehow, with our central leadership, are still wrestling with the uncertainty of this and are wondering whether or not we're going to have to deal. And I don't, in the end, I still don't understand how we came to that conclusion, because it had come out of Wuhan, it was out of East Asia, it was now in Northern Europe. How you thought it wasn't going to get to us, I don't know. But really, we had to contact the people we knew in Wuhan and Italy to say, what is this? Do we need to be worried? By the end of this week, an email was circulating from the Italians, people who were in Lombardy, who said, this is really real, and you must prepare. Even if you don't feel like it's necessary now, you must start. And so we pulled the team together. This is my intensive care team on the right there. And we made the best estimate we could based upon the infection rates, the rate of hospitalization that was being reported out of China and Italy, and the rate of admission to intensive care. And we found out from that we, even with the best estimates, that we would be out of full capacity in 3 weeks from a standing start. So, that Friday is a day like today. Everything felt normal, the world felt normal. But the maths told us that we were going to be out of bed in 3 weeks. And so we started preparing. The problem is there's about 1 million tasks that have to happen now. The National Health Service is an organization of 1.5 million employees, and it has to now pivot and face a threat that it was never designed to face, and one which it is under-resourced to face. We need to learn to put on personal protective equipment, which is a non-trivial thing, to put it on without contaminating yourself and to take it off without contaminating everybody else around you, and then to work in it. It's hard to work in. We have to delegate those tasks to people because there's 1 million other tasks we need to get done. And we had to give some of those tasks in the way that you saw the Apollo flight controllers doing to some of our most junior people. Get me a training program, train all 10,000 people on the front line of our hospital, and across the country, 1.5 million people have to go through the same thing. Day 9 of this, I get a phone call and I get seconded into the strategic command team. Now, the films will tell you that when you're in a disaster movie, there's a list of people the government ring up and they go send a helicopter or an armed escort and they bring you in. That's not what happens. Someone in Central has the job of dealing with this emergency, and if you've dealt with them before and your surname is close to the start of the alphabet, you get a phone call and they say, come in, I'm short of people, you need to help. I get seconded, that's my contract on the right. When they first seconded me, they didn't know how long this thing was going to last for, so they said end date, attachment will terminate on end of the COVID-19 incident. At that time, we all thought that was going to be 3 or 6 months, and I was there 3 years later. Here is an important principle that I learned early in that secondment. I was embedded with the military, and we had these lovely dashboards that showed all the numbers on them, and all of the hospitals and the number of beds they had and how occupied those beds were. And we had numbers like 85, 90%. And everyone loves big data. It's a great thing. But you should know that data has a definition. Data is simply the comma-separated variables in your spreadsheets. It doesn't become information until you process it, and it doesn't get insight until someone with some knowledge of the real world maps that onto their experience. And it's a big mistake to make, because if you are trying to command an incident and you do not have accurate insight and information from front line, you cannot get to the right answer. Now, I knew the people who were working in the units that we were surveying, and so I phoned them up and I said, it says that you're about 90% capacity here, you've got some headroom, is that your read? And then they would scream at me for about 10 minutes and swear at me and tell me that what the hell was I doing, and it was fine for me in my big office in Elephant and Castle, and that they were done about 2 weeks ago and they've been doubly done since that time. Now, that's the difference between insight and the data, and we weren't closing the gap. So I asked the military how they did this. How do you know what's going on in a forward operating base like the one in this picture, which is in Afghanistan? How do you know in Whitehall what's going on there? Because you need to know, otherwise you can't strategically command that war. And I said, I'm sure you don't do it the way we are doing this, which is by getting the senior person to send a spreadsheet back with how many rifles and rounds of ammunition and ration packs you have. And they said, yeah, no, we don't do that. If we want to know what's going on here, we send a senior officer down with a protection detail, and he or she talks to the captain in charge of the forward operating base, and the captain looks around him and thinks, what fighting did we do last week? What fighting have we done today? What fighting does the intelligence say we're going to do next week? And how long can we therefore hold out for? It's a complex assessment of a complex system by a system expert, and that is insight. And so that became my job. So I organised the equivalent capability for the National Health Service. My teams went out and visited 55 of our acute trusts in England, about half of all the acute hospitals in England. We provided that insight and fed it back to strategic, and that is how we managed the rest of the incident. Now, the great thing about being a national clinical advisor is you have to advise, but you don't have to decide. And the curse is that you don't get to decide when it's bloody obvious to you what needs to happen. This is our modelling point in October 31, and we can see you don't need a high school education in mathematics to see where that curve is going. The curve to the left from April 2020 was the worst thing the health service had faced in its 75-year history. The country was in bits in terms of our health service, at least, and no one could really believe that there could be worse in store. Everyone thought the models must be wrong. The summer was very quiet. Everyone must have had it. It's not coming back. But I think, again, that was wishful thinking. Well, it was wishful thinking, because we move into Christmas without any real definitive measures here. And if you think about what Christmas is in the context of an infectious pandemic, right? Christmas is a multi-regional, multi-generational mixing of people over extended periods of time with all of the inhibitions down because they're full of alcohol. It's an absolute catastrophe for us, and we get walloped. So my teams have to go into this, and they end up having to deal with. And now my teams are in response mode. We have nothing else to give them other than simple, non-centralized control. The central principle is do what you can with what you've got where you are. We will help you if we can, but just adapt and survive out there. And they did. They were absolutely remarkable. But this wasn't about command and control. This was about facilitative leadership. It was saying, we believe you, we trust you, go do it. If you need help, come to us. But there's not enough time, and you've just got to deliver it. That middle picture is a mother and daughter nursing team going on shift on an intensive care in the UK before vaccines were available. Never let anyone tell you that this wasn't hard. Never let anyone tell you that. I was there. It was hard every day. I have been on duty for massive train crashes, for at least 2 bombings. In fact, the last major incident I was on for in this country, I was walking across London Bridge on the way here, was the London Bridge attacks, in which we produced 16 Priority 1 casualties over an 8-minute attack. None of that was as bad as this was every single day for the best part of 2 years. Never let anyone tell you it wasn't bad. Boxing Day, I get sent into a hospital to recover one of our hospitals that's near to failure. Now, we always used to say, well, health systems don't really fail, they just keep going. But human resource is exhaustible, metaphorically and literally, and this hospital was there. People were dying in ambulances outside because there was no room to bring them inside. People on the wards needed moving to intensive care, but there were no intensive care beds. This was a place on the verge of collapse, and it was our job to go in and transfer out as many people as we could. During the pandemic, while I was with Strategic Command, I also did my night shifts whenever I could. And I did this in particular, so this is intensive care retrieval. And you do that because as a leader, if you're going to command people to do something, you must be prepared to do the worst and the most dangerous thing that you are asking them to do, otherwise they will not respect you and you will not be able to understand what the limit of that capacity is. The most dangerous thing during the pandemic was to sit in the back of an ambulance with someone dying of COVID, wearing PPE, hoping that you would not be also doing the same thing because your PPE didn't work. So I was out with the teams doing that. And that's really important. It's really important. The frontline teams hate you for sitting in your office wearing your shirt and your tie while they're out there doing this. So you do not have their respect if you are not willing to be there with them at least some of that time and show them that you can do it. This is how you survive, in this last 2 slides. This is how you survive anything out there. I've done this on motorways and I've done this during a pandemic. If you're facing uncertainty, you must be willing to make a decision in the face of uncertainty before you have all the information. On big decisions, we always love to gather more information, right? I mean, I remortgaged my house and I asked for all the information. You just don't have time. You have to make a decision, then you have to commit to the consequences of that decision because that's all you've got. And then, if you're facing a fast-moving threat, it will outpace you unless you can multiply your effort. So you must delegate authority to force multiply your effort in the way that NASA did during Apollo. Delegate authority, defer to expertise wherever it lies in your system, even if it lies with some of the most junior people. And then the next 2 things are you must innovate and transform. If your organization is facing crisis, it is by definition temporarily not fit for purpose, and it must transform. It transforms through innovation, and it innovates by you delegating authority to the frontline teams and allowing them to solve their problems locally with facilitation from you. And then the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to fail. You're going to fail because you made decisions in the face of incomplete information. It's inevitable. That whole thing about NASA during Apollo 13, of failure is not an option, that's the tagline for the film, it's pure mythology. No one ever said that at NASA. Gene Kranz used it for the title for his autobiography. Gene Kranz was the flight director for Apollo 13. Because he saw it in Tom Hanks's film, and he thought it's a great title for a book. During Apollo 13, they knew they might fail. In fact, they knew that failure might be the only option. So you must have mechanisms in your organization for failure, to fail well, to use failure not as something to be ashamed of, but to use failure as an asset, something you can learn from and cash in for the opportunity to escape to a better future sometime when you face a less marginal threat. And finally, you iterate and you go again. What makes this all fine is that you keep going back through the loops. If you look at mathematical theory and physiology, the thing that stabilizes chaotic system is appropriate feedback loops. So you have to have a process which reevaluates itself and goes back, and it has to run quite rapidly. On a motorway, I run this in minutes. In a pandemic, you run this in hours and days. But you run them and you keep running them, and that's how we got through the pandemic. Every day we were wrong, and every day we were a little bit less wrong until one day we were almost right. In the face of catastrophe, almost right is more than good enough. So last slide. So we go into January, and January's pretty grim. And we're hitting the peak now, mid-January. And I go onto shift one night, 12 hours on, and 6 of my patients die, one after another, through the hospital. We're just running from arrest to arrest to arrest. And in the morning, it's been a really tough night, and I come down to the unit. This is the main intensive care unit at University College, just a couple of miles down the road from here. And it's the weekend that it really snows in London, and there's a massive thick blanket of cloud over London, and the sun is coming up, and the sky is this beautiful red, and it looks like it's on fire, and the nurses are stopping for a moment to take a photograph of it, as you can see there. And this is the last lesson of leadership to tell you that if you do face down something that is hard, you must always remind your team that no matter how dark the night is, the sun eventually comes back. And that's really important because you have to keep them going, and they have to keep going. I've spent my life going around other organizations looking for lessons of leadership and command and how you deal with risk and uncertainty, to bring it back to healthcare, to help healthcare. But honestly, in all of my travels, and I've been to Afghanistan during the war, I've been with NASA during shuttle ops, I've looked at Apollo 11 and Apollo 13, I've been on bombing incidents and train crashes, and all of that experience, nothing has ever been like this, and I have never seen a team perform as well as these teams did for 2.5 years and face this down. On paper, it was not doable, and they did it anyway. Thank you very much. Thank you.